visions that John was given as we move through this marvelous, mysterious, wonderful book that I hope that at least you're appreciating now how much you've got to know the Old Testament to appreciate the images and the things that are happening in these visions. So let's get right into it. Chapter 12, let's look at the first 6 verses. Here we see these images of a woman and a dragon. And a great sign appeared in heaven. Okay, in heaven. Always remember where you are. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains in the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. I remember as a child reading Revelation chapter 12 and 13 over and over and over. Probably just because of the fantastic images of women and fleeing and dragons, and then 13 we get to beasts and they're strange and monsters, and just wondering what in the world is all this about. We definitely get to some provocative images here. And again, the question is, interpretively, what is this representing? What is this about? When, who, where, and all these questions. So again, what I've been trying to do is lead us through, well, how have Christians understood this? How have they seen this through the history of the church in different ways? And so I'm giving you these 3 kind of vantage points: the historicist, the preterist, the futurist. So let's just keep doing that, and that maybe helps us. So the historicist sees really chapter 12 all the way through 19, which we're not getting to tonight. We'll get to that next week. Sees that as sort of a regurgitation of what's already been presented. In other words, it's just kind of presenting the same information with different visions, with different details, sort of a retrospective reiteration of the same prophecies about the same events. The woman and the dragon here represent sort of different sides of the same things that the book has already been envisioning in chapters 4 through 11. Whereas chapters 4 through 11 represented sort of the outward corrupted church. Now we're looking at the internal, true, faithful church, but the same events. So from the historicists, typically, now again, I oversimplify these things because within these groups, there's a whole lot of disagreement about certain details. But so just kind of, give me that latitude, I hope, and that grace to overgeneralize, just to help you understand where these positions are coming from. But the historicist says the woman is sort of like the true church, giving birth, you might say, to the true church. The male child represents children of the church. Of course, the dragon is the imperial Rome that's pursuing and persecuting Christians. The child being caught up symbolizes the church being taken up to the throne. Now, stay with me, which symbolizes sort of what happened when the church itself got enthroned under Constantine. Remember, the Roman emperor that began to turn, and then Theodosius. So it's the idea that the church becomes sort of royal, goes to the throne. So again, it's fitting these images into, on this side of it, things that have already happened. So again, these are just representations of the church, imperial Rome, persecutions, things like this. The preterists, here's where they begin to go in 2 different directions. There are certain preterists, again, remembering that what that means is the things we're reading about are things that have already happened from our point of view. So some preterists say, well, this is just continuing to talk about the destruction of Jerusalem. You could have guessed that by now, right? Other preterists say, well, now here's a division where we're beginning to talk more about the fall of Rome and the judgment on Rome. And so you're going to get both of those. Some that shift to Rome as the focus. Babylon is Rome. But some who will say, no, this coded Babylon is still Jerusalem. And here the preterist understanding, the woman is the faithful remnant of the Old Testament Israel, gives birth to a male child, of course, which is the Messiah. The dragon represents the beasts, how he's described, the beast in Daniel that represent all those four different empires that rose and fell, that type of thing. Christ is taken away in his ascension, caught up to heaven is the idea. The flight of the woman represents Jewish Christians fleeing from Jerusalem, if you think it's about the destruction of Jerusalem, into the wilderness, so to speak. Or it could be about Christians during the Nero's persecution. So again, what you remember about the preterist vision or interpretation is they might be talking about Jerusalem, might be talking about Rome. It just depends on how you want to interpret it and see it. The futurist point of view takes this, and of course the woman is Israel, gives birth to Christ, the Messiah. The dragon is Satan, the devil, who's identified in verse 9 a little bit later. The scene is Satan waiting for Messiah to come, to devour, to destroy, which is represented even in the gospel accounts where Herod tried to kill all the children when Jesus was born. So that fits very nicely. The woman fleeing into the wilderness is Jewish believers avoiding Antichrist during the tribulation period. And this 1,260 days, 42 months, 3.5 years, a time, times, a half a time, expressed in different ways, is now representing for the futurists. If you're looking forward, it's representing the second half of the tribulation, sometimes referred to as the Great Tribulation. So here in chapter 12, if you're seeing Revelation as something that is still all in the future, that's what futurist meant. It's all in the future, beginning at chapter 4. Now we're headed into that second half of the tribulation. Whether you see it as a literal 7-year time period or whether you see 7 years as representative of an indefinite time period, this is moving into the second part of that from this point of view. All right? Clear as mud? Good? All right. Let's keep going. No, it's verse 7. It says 1 through 6, but it's verse 7. Verse 7 through 9. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan. So there he's identified. The deceiver of the whole world, he was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And of course, back in the previous verses where it talks about the tail and the third of the stars is where we get this idea of third of the angels. A lot of people think that represents that. Some other details on down in the rest of the chapter, verses 10 through 17. I won't read all those, but I give them to you. There's rejoicing in heaven, of course, when this happens. But the idea is woe to the earth. Woe to the earth. Because now this evil one, this dragon, is being cast down to the earth. He's been thrown out of heaven, but now he's coming to the earth. And he's going to be really mad because he knows his time is short. So his wrath is going to be furious. It's going to be the worst than it's ever been because he knows his time is short. The dragon pursues the woman. She's about to give birth, but she was given 2 wings, I should say, like a great eagle to fly away in the wilderness where she's nourished, again for that familiar time period. It talks about the serpent somehow pouring out water like a flood out of his mouth but the earth opens up and swallows water. Woman's protected. And then the serpent goes off to make war on her offspring, those who hold to the testimony of Jesus. So it's a picture of the dragon being warring in heaven is the picture, but being defeated and thrown out, but down to the earth. And now he is going to go after Jesus' followers, okay, is the idea. Now, how is this interpreted? Well, the historicist sees the scene being depicted in heaven. Although it's being depicted in heaven, it occurred with early Christians under the Roman Empire until the time that Rome came under Christian rulers. But it also depicts the rise of the papacy and the persecution of Christians. So the historicist is always saying there was this early persecution of Christians by Jews, then by the Roman Empire, but then eventually Christianity triumphed over the empire. But then after that, you had this corruption that began to set in. And so that's always the pattern that the visions are sort of tracing in that understanding. The flight of the woman into the wilderness on the wings represents persecution of believers. Some interpret this as fleeing from Rome. Some early heresies that came into the church. Others see now Satan using the rise of the papacy in Rome to become the agent of persecution against the true saints. Okay, so this is how the historicist understands these images. The preterist explains that this is why the woman fled into the wilderness. Some of the preterists interpret Michael here as Jesus himself, which is a little unusual. Most people see this is Michael, the archangel. It's not Jesus. Some say, no, well, this is really like the chief of the angels. And who would be the chief of the angels but Jesus himself? And so some people say, and it might be corresponding to, the one that appeared to Joshua and this type of thing. Yeah, I think so. I think to say that this is Jesus is a bit of a stretch, personally. Yeah, I think so. But some people have interpreted it that way, that this heavenly battle represents the accomplishment of Jesus himself defeating Jesus. In other words, this heavenly battle is a symbol of Jesus defeating Satan in the crucifixion and the resurrection and his work, and then Satan is finally out. The question comes in because in the Bible you see, when did Satan fall? Right? You come back to this question. Clearly, you have Satan appearing tempting in the garden. So there was a falling away that happened even way back, right? We also see Satan coming and going in which book? Job, coming before the presence of God in the book of Job. So there's this idea of, does Satan still currently have the ability to come and go in the presence of God still, even in this state? The book of Job might point to that. And so some people say this represents a second falling where he is permanently cast out down to the earth before he's going to eventually be, destined in the lake of fire. And here the preterist says this symbolizes, Jesus' victory in the cross, the resurrection, his ascension, and now Satan's cast down the earth and his time is short. That's kind of where they're coming from. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Outside of time, yeah. Yeah, don't get me on the time stuff, Burton, because then my brain will break. Yeah. So, who knows? But anyway, that's how they see it. The futurist, again, they see this as the midpoint of a future tribulation. So again, this is in the future of 7 years. Most look at it literal, not everybody. And most associate this vision with that of the fifth trumpet that we're going to see, of Satan falling from heaven, right? To unleash sort of his torment on mankind. and Satan continues to attack who we would call tribulation saints, saints that are coming out of the tribulation. Remember, in the futurist point of view, particularly the dispensational point of view, where is the church? Church is gone. Church has never even been here, not for any of this stuff, not since the beginning of chapter 4. So it's this horrible, worst persecution ever is happening on people who are coming to Christ during the tribulation, under this understanding. Okay? All right. Now, let's go into chapter 13. Here we get to the beasts that serve the dragon. So verses 1 through 4. John says, "Now I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like bears, its mouth like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority." One of the heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. And the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshiped the dragon, for he has given his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" Okay, so you get the introduction of this frightening beast coming out of the sea, and then you're going to have one out of the land. The sea has often been considered the place of the Gentiles, the place of the nations that come out of the sea. You see the 10 horns, the 7 heads, the description of it. Does it sound like anything that we've encountered before in the Old Testament? What does it sound like? In Daniel, right, exactly. I heard it over there too. Yeah, Daniel. It's very, very similar. And so again, you may go back and get re-familiar with Daniel and his 70 weeks and all of those prophecies. And remember, those were probably most difficult stuff in the Old Testament to try to interpret. But you can see in Revelation here a lot of similarity in the imagery that is there. So you have this beast. He's given power by the dragon. He something makes the world marvel because the beast appears to have an injury that would be unrecoverable from, but yet he revives. And the world is even worshiping the dragon and the beast. If you go on in verses 5 through 10, some other details, it says there that the beast he's arrogant, he's blasphemous. He's just this horrible figure, and he's given authority for 42 months. Again, 3.5 years, right? So 3.5 years. He makes war on the saints, and those who are not believers, they offer their worship to the beast, while believers are called to endure. There's a couple times here in this section that we're going over where the text even kind of turns to the one who's reading or hearing. It says, this is a call for you to endure. Which is interesting because it might be like, for you, you're under persecution. You need to endure. This is all symbolizing persecution, but this is a call for endurance. Now, how has this been interpreted? Well, the historicists, universally, they say this is Rome. The beast is Rome. And it connects again to Daniel 7. And there later in Revelation in 17, we're not there yet, but chapter 17, verse 9, where the 7 heads of this beast are described as the 7 mountains. And it was pretty well known that in other historical documents that Rome was known as a city on 7 hills, 7 mountains. And so it's like, maybe that's a clue, maybe it's a connection that this is representing Rome. When we get to that chapter, we'll jog our memories about that. Others see this first beast as representing pagan Rome, early Rome that was persecuting, and then they're going to see the second beast maybe as papal Rome as well. And again, this 42 months, 1,260 days. The historicists often translate that, say that's code for 1,260 years, right? So we're talking about the time of the Middle Ages, and the domination of the papacy and that type of thing. So again, you're familiar with this, right? So again, the historicist is saying, hey, we're kind of covering the same ground, just with different imagery. The preterist, the beast is Rome for most. But also it's likely an emperor. Many think it may be referring to Nero himself. And many Roman emperors promoted their own worship, which we know is true, which would be blasphemy, right? We know that they persecuted Christians, so some see a representation of that here. And again, stuff that's already happened. The futurist often views, especially the dispensational futurist, often views this beast as a revived Roman Empire. And sometimes there's a lot made out of the 10 being a confederation of 10 different countries that essentially is reviving the old Roman Empire, and this type of thing. But the beast represents in the future, during the time of the Great Tribulation, the rise of Antichrist, the capital A guy. And he's going to be some sort of political leader. It's going to be a revived empire, so to speak, a confederation of nations, whatever it's going to look like. And there's something that's going to happen that's going to be very convincing to the world about this death wound that he appears to miraculously recover from, that's going to leave everybody in awe, this type of thing, whatever that may be. Again, the 42 months is the second half of the tribulation, the Great Tribulation. This figure is often connected to the little horn, you remember in Daniel, that had a mouth that was arrogant and saying pompous things, of the 10 horns. The little horn that displaced the 3 horns, if I remember right, and had a mouth and was talking. Many have said, it's this guy. Okay, again, putting these pieces together in this view. And the persecution is of Jews who have become believers, and it's like the worst persecution that anyone's ever seen under this beast, this Antichrist. All right, the second beast, verses 11 through 18. And I saw another beast rising out of the earth. First one's out of the sea, this one's out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. I don't know how a dragon speaks, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence and makes the earth and the inhabitants worship the first beast. There's something about this beast that serves the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. What does that sound like? What do the images sound like from the Bible that you know about? He performs great signs. He makes fire come down from heaven in front of people. Yeah, it sounds like Elijah, like a prophet, like, pray and fire comes down from heaven, like Elijah. Yeah. The connotation seems to be here of religion. Religion seems to be the connotation. There's a certain counterfeit imitation of religion that's going on here, right? With this second beast. Make sense? Even these images of, Old Testament prophets and things like this, making them worship, doing great signs, all of these kinds of things. Okay? We'll go on the rest of it. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast. So he made this image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand on the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast, the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, For it is the number of man, and his number is 666. Now you've heard of that, right? I'm a child of the 80s. There was this absolute obsession with this stuff in the 80s. You remember, Lynn? Devil worship, 666. I mean, playing records backwards, right? We all did it. Was there a message? I mean, it was out of control. And a lot of it, I think, was associated with the popularity of eschatology, of particularly the dispensational interpretation that was so popular at the time. And it was fascinating. I mean, who wasn't fascinated by this stuff? It captured your imagination, and you had so many questions about it. So there's a lot of information here about this second beast. So let me just run through kind of the different ways this has been seen. The historicist view, again, this is representing papal Rome. Okay? When in doubt, if someone says, what's the historicist view? Just say, it's anti-Catholic. It's just, it's all about Rome and the Pope and how bad it is. That's pretty much it so much of the time. So this is about a corrupt church claiming to have miracles and signs and all these things, imitating Christ, a lamb, 2 horns. The historicists would say, look, if you go back in history, you can see how this has been fulfilled because the Roman Catholic Church, they have all these claims to miracles, right? The stigmata, people get the signs of the cross, and, icons weep, and all kinds of miracles, and that they claim to persuade people. They say this stuff's all over the place. This makes so much sense. They threaten and persecute people through the Middle Ages with excommunication. I know that didn't sound scary to us, but it was scary to people then. Or they threaten them with torture or even death. They say this is clearly the Roman Church through the Middle Ages is what this beast is an image of, particularly the religious side of all of that. Now you get to the 666, and it's interesting. In Hebrew, in Greek, in Latin, all of those languages, their numbers, they use their alphabet characters for numbers. So every word can have a value because their letters are assigned values. So any word can have a value. So there are literally infinite number of words that could add up to 666 in Hebrew, Greek, or Latin. Does that make sense? But you notice what it says here. This calls for wisdom. In other words, as John's writing this, it's being revealed to him. This calls for wisdom to you who are getting this. You know who this is, 666. Well, it could be a lot of different things, but he's like, but you know who it is, right? So that you're still left wondering, well, who is it? Who is it? The historicists have had different, and again, there are different opinions all over the map on this. Who might this be referring to if it is actually a person? Irenaeus, he's one of our church fathers, early 2nd century. He was one of the earliest ones to try to decode the 666. And he said it was the word that for Latin, like representing the Latin kingdom, Rome, right? Latin. That word itself adds up to 666. Probably also there was one that the Latin title for the Pope, Vicarius Filii Dei, Vicar of the Son of God, also in Latin adds up to 666. So those are some of the earliest interpretations of what that might be referring to. And there have been many speculations even among, and this is where sometimes sometimes they agree with each other when they're not even trying, right? And so even many of the futurists, the dispensationalists, have often speculated that the Antichrist will be the head of the Roman Church, the Pope himself. That makes sense. But again, It's a mystery. The preterists aren't in total agreement on this vision. Some say that this beast is a vision of the cult of the emperor, worshiping the emperor. Some say it's a Roman governor who rises. They say there's a distinction. They says this beast comes from the land or the earth, and that expression must refer to Israel, the land. And so it's probably talking about a Roman governor there, more local, under Nero, who this is talking about. Others say that maybe it's someone arising out of Israel who's a false prophet, but causing people to bow down to Rome, the first beast. The preterists say that John writing this would have expected that his readers would know who he was talking about here. And I guess one of the most common things you hear for the 666 is the title for Nero, Caesar Nero, in Hebrew. Not in Greek, not in Latin. But in Hebrew, the readers would have known to use Hebrew letters to figure out who it was. Does that make sense? Maybe, although he's writing to churches in Asia Minor which probably weren't speaking Hebrew. So I don't know how all that might work. But you have a lot of speculation about this number. Futurists, how do they see this passage and these beasts? Generally, this beast that comes from the earth, clearly, and you can see why, is seen as some sort of future religious leader. That makes a lot of sense, because that's how he's described. Supports the beast, empowered by the dragon, Satan himself. They equate this with the false prophet that's going to be mentioned later, chapters 19, 20. Most see this as the head of an apostate church, which again, a lot of Protestants point to Rome, so that's who it's going to be. Somehow even see it as maybe a false Messiah, maybe a Jew who's a false Messiah coming, but really Antichrist. This idea of setting up an image of the beast, some futurists, especially dispensationalists, see this as setting up a statue of the Antichrist in the temple in Jerusalem that's now been rebuilt. And this is the abomination of desolation that even Daniel talked about, or even Jesus talked about in the Olivet Discourse. The number 666 for futurists, many of them take it as more symbolic, which is interesting. This is one area where the futurists or even dispensationalists, who tend to be very literal, take this as symbolic. It's not really identified with, it's not identifying a particular person, but it is saying that it's, and you've probably heard this before, 666 is one digit short of 777, which would be the ideal number for God and reflect the Trinity and this type of thing. But 666 underscores the idea that even though this beast, this figure, is doing these wonders and signs, he's just a man. It's a number of man. He's not God. He's touting himself as God. He's saying the beast is God, but he's not. He is human, even though he's touting himself as divine. So, you have these two beasts that serve the dragon. Any questions at this point? Probably tons of them, I know. Yeah. Oh, sure. I would say that, if I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing, and what we're going to get to when it talks about this Armageddon and the army coming from the east and that type of thing, maybe interpreting that as Islam, invasion of Islam, possibly, and an Antichrist as well, being Islamic. Trust me, there's that idea and so many more about all of these identities and who might be who and where they're going to come from. And We just don't know for sure, do we? And even those who see this as future obviously speculate the most because it's all in the future. How might this unfold, and who might these people be, and who might these nations be, and how is this going to play out? I don't know. Clearly, nobody knows. All leading up to the return of Christ, which Jesus said he didn't even know, right? So we just don't know. But it's so fascinating that God has given us this book with all of this imagery and things, and the question always is at the end, what are we supposed to really take from it? What are we supposed to get out of this? Clearly, I hope by now you know that I believe it's not to crack the code. It's something else. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Keep chewing. Keep chewing. That's right. That's a good metaphor. And that's what we're doing. We're chewing like a cow. I know, not that. That's nasty. But yeah, we're just keeping after it and seeking that understanding. Because remember, that's the old classic understanding of doing theology. And you realize that's what you're doing, right? You're doing theology, right? You're thinking about God. And that process is just your faith. Your faith is out front, seeking just to understand better. And that's a good thing. Even if you don't know a lot at the end of the day, it's still a good thing that you're seeking it, that you're chewing, that you're staying after it. Well, let's go on. Let's keep after it. Chapter 14. This is an interesting chapter because in a lot of ways you're kind of wondering, well, how does this fit? We've been moving along here now, and then you get this, and you wonder how it fits into the rest, and it is a challenge. Chapter 14, just the first 5 verses. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and their father's name written on their foreheads. Now remember, we've seen these people before, right? Back in chapter 7. Okay? And I heard a voice from heaven, like the roar of many waters and like the sound of a loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of the harpists playing on their harps. And they were singing a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn the song except for the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as firstfruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. Wow. Okay. So now the scene shifts back to heaven. Mount Zion, which is that literally Jerusalem? Is it looking to heaven? It would seem to be heavenly, or maybe it's both. But now you have the Lamb, which we know is Christ, the 144,000 back in chapter 7, those who had been sealed, right? Which, and we know sealing means made secure, right? Protected, made secure. Again, some people saw these literally as Jews because it's like, 12,000 from each tribe. Is that right? Something like that. And or more than that, but what's the number? I'm blanking out. Is it 12,000? Okay, yeah, okay. I'm doing math is hard. So some people see them as literal Jews during the tribulation who are saved out. Some people say, no, this is representative of the people of God, because even in the New Testament, even Paul talks about the true Israel, Jews and Gentiles, and this number is representative. It's not literal. It represents all the true people of God. So ever how you want to slice that, Christians have thought of that in different ways. But here they are again, right? It names the tribes. But the tribes are in different order, and some are left out. It's a little strange, too. So Again, you may see it symbolically, you may see it literally. I'm not sure that matters that much. You know, I guess you can just debate it. But here they are again. So the question is, okay, here they are again, and we see this beautiful scene, right? We just had this horrible nightmare scene of these beasts and what they're going to do. But now you have this really beautiful scene of Christ, his people, the 144,000, and the testimony to that they've been faithful, right? To the very end. And again, it ends with them being blameless in him. So this is a wonderful picture. It goes on, verses 6 through 13. I'll just kind of summarize them for you. You have three angels that appear to make pronouncements. The first one announces God's coming judgment and a call for the people of the earth to worship the true God, who's the true creator. The second one brings an announcement of the fall of Babylon the Great. So here's the first time we see that reference. Babylon the Great's about to fall. The third comes with an announcement of a condemnation on everyone who received the mark of the beast. And again, in these verses, you see an emphasis on a call for the saints to endure, right? And then a voice announces, "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on," which is interesting as well. So in this short chapter, it's how does this fit? How does this scene fit into everything that we've been looking at? So the historicist says that now we're to a better time. So they're jumping forward in history. Remember, the historicist is moving through actual history that is now in our past. And so they're saying we're now to a better place. And again, the 144,000 are these ones that we saw in chapter 7 who were sealed. This is the true people of God. Represents all those who've been faithful to Christ. Some historicists see this as a new era of history. We're now moving beyond the Middle Ages that was so horrible for the true Christians under Rome. And we're even moving past the Reformation. Some say this is times of awakening, better times. Some mention the Wesleys, the Whitfield, Edwards. They even move on into the 19th century with a guy like Finney and awakening and revivalism, that this is representing a better time for true Christianity. The fall of Babylon, here mentioned by one of the angels' announcements, is the fall of the papacy. That finally the dominance of the papacy, the persecutions from the papacy, all of that finally comes to an end, which the historians would say did happen. Reformation, and maybe not in the Reformation, but what was in the wake of the Reformation, that finally does come to an end, and how this fits into history. The preterist says this vision is here to encourage the persecuted church. Still looking at this as the first believers who were Jews, encouraging them during times of persecution, because they are the first fruits of all of this. And the gospel that has gone out into the whole world is happening at this time. The preterist here is divided. Some see Babylon here, the fall of Babylon, still referring to Jerusalem, but many see it as Rome as well. And the third angel's announcement about the condemnation on those with the mark of the beast could be about those who are now in hell, eternal condemnation. Or some of them say it could be about just the awfulness of what was going to happen as Jerusalem fell, or maybe even later Rome. What I've noticed in looking at these different views as we move through is some of them have a harder time keeping their view consistent at different points in the book. And that's really not a surprise, is it? Because if you adopt kind of a rigid view, at some point I think they all get a little strained and tested, and it becomes a little more difficult. And I think the preterists really is challenged here in chapter 13 or 14 of kind of what to do. The futurist here, again, it's hard to interpret this chapter because it doesn't seem to be kind of organically connected to what just came before it or what's getting ready to come after it. A lot of futurists see it sort of as a parenthesis, like an additional thought that just sort of stuck in there to elaborate, give some more commentary. And the futurists, some of them see that this is the triumph of the 144,000 following Christ's second return. Like this sort of looking ahead to what it's going to look like after Christ returns and his reign on Mount Zion, because Mount Zion is mentioned there, right? So his reign, this millennial kingdom that's going to be there. This division, there is some division on the identity of this eternal gospel that's mentioned. Some say it's the same old gospel of the apostles that we've always had. Some say it's the good news of the coming millennial kingdom. Some have even suggested it's the good news, because that's what gospel means, right? It's the good news that God's judgment is finally on its way. So any of that could be good news as they interpret what is eternal gospel. They identify Babylon in various ways, the futurists do. Some see it as Rome. Some see it as a code for just sort of a religious system. Babylon is not necessarily a particular city, but it's a system, a mindset. Some say it could be a modern city that we don't really know which one it may be. It may just be a code name for everything that's opposed to God. Just, Babylon became a word that just covers all of that, whatever it may be. And we see they would say that we see a really clear picture of the judgment, the eternal condemnation of the lost, of the wicked. And this thing at the very end where it talked about blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. The futurists would say that seems to indicate some sort of, mark from a certain point in history now they are blessed. And they would say that refers to not past martyrs, but it refers to the ones now in this great tribulation. The ones who are going to die from now on in this time period is how they would understand that. All right. Let's look here at 14 through 20. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud, one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head, a sharp sickle in his hand, and another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, "Put your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe." So he who sat on the cloud swung the sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Okay, so keep that image in your mind. You have this reaping now. You have this one like a son of man. That sound familiar? Daniel, right? I saw one like a son of man coming in the cloud. Here, he looked and behold, they're seated in a cloud. So it's a little bit different, but definitely that image of a son of man sticks out. And you have this image of a harvest. Okay, then we get this. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, "Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung the sickle across the earth, gathered the grape harvest of the earth, and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. Don't miss that. And the winepress was trodden outside the city. The blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. Or, people disagree, 180 to 200 miles, something like that. Okay. So you have these two images of angels, two reapings. The question is, what is it? What is it symbolizing? What is it supposed to be conveying, telling us about? Let me give you a couple of passages that have similar language. Go back to Joel chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. "Let the nations stir themselves up, come to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Don't really know where that is. For Joel chapter 3. For there I will set to judge all the surrounding nations. And here's the similarity. Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Go in, tread, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow, for their evil is great. So there's that same imagery of wrath and judgment being associated with the pressing of grapes. Okay? And you can understand how that image in that part of the world would be associated with wrath, right? Because, you know, how they got the grape juice, you had to smash the grapes, right? And, you know, that's a really vivid image of crushing, you know, and even the juice coming out, blood and that type of thing. So you see the imagery, but it was there in Joel as well as in Revelation. In Matthew, this is very interesting. Matthew 13, Jesus told a parable of the weeds and the wheat, or the tares in the wheat. You're familiar with that. And in the explanation he gave, this is one of the few parables he gave an explanation. He said, the field is the world, the good seed is the sons of the kingdom, the weeds are the sons of the evil one. So the wheat and the wheat, they're people. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. It's exactly the picture we see in Revelation 14, right? Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers. So in one of Jesus' parables, you have this imagery as well of angels sending to reap and separate, right, wheat from tares, his people from lost people. So how do we understand chapter 14? The historicist says it's possibly a picture of the final consummation, but a lot of people still, the historicists still see this as the destruction of Rome. They're going to stick to that, right? It's still the destruction of Rome is what it's talking about, and all of its horribleness. The preterist says this is not a picture of the second coming, because Jesus is not riding on the cloud. He's still sitting on the cloud up there. He hasn't come back. So they say this is not, says it's easy to jump to the conclusion that it's the second coming, but it's not. And many still see this, again, as judgment on Jerusalem, possibly the first reaping representing the rescuing of Jewish Christians out of Jerusalem, and the second one referring to its destruction. So again, another image of the same thing being prophesied. Okay, so you see that. The futurists certainly agree that verses 17 through 20 envision horrible judgment coming on the wicked. Most say likely hyperbole, you know, the blood flowing up to the horse's bridle is hyperbole. Not even a lot of the dispensationalists say this is hyperbole, not literal, because that would be hard to imagine. But it does communicate the awfulness of how it's going to be and what it's going to look like. But possibly two different gatherings here. Some connect this scene, especially the second reaping, with what's going to take place that's talked about in one of the bowls of wrath, the sixth one, Armageddon. Okay, that this is like a preview of that. It's the same thing. Now, what's interesting is I think you can read, at least, and particularly with what Jesus said in Matthew 13, and when you look at the first reaper, at the beginning of chapter 14, you can see images of rapture, with an angel from the temple coming out and telling it's time, go reap the earth. But it doesn't appear to be a reaping of judgment, right? It's not that language. It's just like a gathering, gathering in, which is sort of like the language Jesus used in Matthew 13 about the wheat and tares. Possibly. Some people do see this as an image of like, oh, if you want to locate the rapture from from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, if you want to locate that in Revelation, where do you locate it? Well, we talked about how dispensationalists and futurists see it in chapter 4. John, come up here. No more church. Rapture must have happened. Others see it here in chapter 14 with this reaping imagery that sort of correlates with what Jesus said in Matthew 13. But where would that put the rapture? In a timeline of events, if we're holding to a futurist point of view. Be a mid-tribulation. This is happening somewhere midway through the tribulation period, which would seem to indicate, well, the Christians aren't being raptured out until some of the tribulation occurs, and it's going to happen somewhere in the middle here if you take this to be an image of the rapture. That's a big if. That's a little word, but it's a big if you see it here. And some people do, so I just make you aware of that. Oh my goodness, I got to go. Okay. Chapter 15. We finally get to the 7 bowls of wrath. And I can move through these pretty quickly. Chapter 15. Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and amazing, 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last, for with them the wrath of God is finished. Okay, so, wow. Okay. So now we know, like, oh, God's about to wrap this up with 7 plagues. Now, what does that remind you of? Egypt, Exodus, of course. 7 plagues. They're going to be described as being poured out, literally, with 7 bowls, but they're plagues. So, some other details here in verses 2 through 8. I'll just give those to you quickly. John sees a vision of saints who have endured, overcome the beast, its image, the number of his name, worshiping God. He sees out of heaven from the sanctuary comes 7 angels with 7 plagues. One of the 4 living creatures gave the angels these golden bowls full of the wrath of God. Okay. So again, the imagery is these bowls are going to be poured out and they're full of the wrath of God. This is it. This is going to, there's been all of this judgment, right? We've seen the seals broken and the trumpets have blasted. It's been partial judgment all along the way. Now the bowls, this is it. The full wrath of God. So this is like a heavenly prelude, chapter 15, before the wrath is going to be poured out. It's like, it was sort of like the silence in heaven before it all started, right? You know, this is like a prelude before the real wrath is going to be unleashed and what's going to happen. The historicist generally sees the bowls of wrath as God's final destruction of the anti-Christian power, the papacy, throughout much of history. So this is the final wrath upon that. The preterist sees this as the depiction of the final judgment, either on Jerusalem or Rome, depending on which way they go. The futurist, of course, sees this coming bowls of wrath as the final judgments of the great tribulation before the return of Christ. Like this is the consummation of the great tribulation of 7 years, whether that's literal or figurative. So then in chapter 16 is when we get to these bowls of wrath. Chapter 16, verse 1, then I heard a loud voice from the temple telling the 7 angels, go and pour out on heaven the 7 bowls of the wrath of God. Okay. So again, here are angels. Angels are always doing this, right? They're the messengers. They're the ones doing these things. And I'll just go through these, real quick. I won't read them to you because they're pretty straightforward. The first bowl says painful sores appear on everybody who has the mark of the beast, and they're in agony. The second bowl, the sea turns to blood. Everything in it dies. The third bowl, the rivers and springs of water become blood. The fourth bowl, the sun becomes hot and scorches people. And here in this bowl, but again, the people won't repent is also put there. The fifth bowl, the beast, his kingdom is thrown into darkness. And there's great fear. But again, the people won't repent. What does this remind you of? Egypt. Yeah, they were called plagues. even the water turning to blood and boils. I mean, it just reminds you of that. It's like, okay, we've kind of seen this before, which is interesting. Now, the sixth and the seventh bowls get more elaborate. Y'all want me to quit and wait, or you want me to finish? Deborah will leave whenever she wants to. Let's go. Let's keep going. Okay. So the sixth bowl, here it is. The sixth angel poured out his bowl. The great river Euphrates, and the water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, because there's the false prophet, which most people say the second beast, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. Frogs, right? Exodus, right? For they are demonic spirits performing signs, and who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeping his garments on, that he may not go about naked and be seen exposed. And they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. So now we're finally to Armageddon. Or Hebrew Har Megiddo, the Mount of Megiddo. Sixth bowl. Okay. And let me give you the seventh bowl. And we'll talk about them. The seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air. And a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." Does that sound familiar? Yeah. I think it's supposed to. And there were flashes of lightning, rumbles, peals of thunder, and a great earthquake such as there had never been since man was on the earth. So great was the earthquake. The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and God remembered Babylon the Great to make her drain the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. And every island fled away, and no mountains were to be found, and great hailstones, about 100 pounds each, fell from heaven on people. They cursed God for the plague of the hail because the plagues were so severe. All right, wow. So let me just summarize here, and this is where we're going to stop tonight. The historicist says the bowls represent actual events in history. Right? You expect that they represent things that have happened in history, primarily things that work to weaken and judge papal power in Europe. One common interpretation is at the beginning of the first bowl, we're now to the French Revolution. Don't snicker, but that is the interpretation. Now we're at the French Revolution, and then we get into all kinds of other wars and conflicts that gradually erode the dominance of the Pope and the Church in Europe. The sixth bowl and the army from the east, the historicist says, may not be a literal war, but it may represent the onslaught, the challenge of Islam, continued challenges from the Roman Church and so forth. But you got to remember, these were 19th century interpreters. The historicist view was very popular back in the 1700s, 1800s, and that type of thing. There's not very many 20th century and on historicist points of view. There's not. But a handful that were into the 20th century have said this Armageddon may have happened in World War I. That they interpret it that way. That may have been what this was looking forward and looking to. But most historians will still say the seventh bowl, though, is still the future. That one hasn't happened yet. Okay, we're still waiting for that one. The preterists, like the historicists, claim that the images of the plagues are highly symbolic. They differ again on whether to interpret these as judgments on Jerusalem in 70 A.D. or judgments on Rome later when it fell as a city and as a nation. Armageddon here, the sixth bowl, was metaphorical, although it is taken from a real place in Israel, the metaphor, but it's metaphorical. And the seventh bowl is a vision of the final destruction of whichever one, Jerusalem or Rome. So they're sticking right there, right? It's not a futurist point of view. The futurist point of view is interesting. The difference is, whether you adopt a literal hermeneutic or a symbolic one regarding these plagues, these bowls of wrath. Some futurists, dispensationalists who look down and they say, well, these are literal. They're literal. I mean, just like the ones in Egypt were literal, the Nile turned to blood. This says the seas are going to turn to blood. It's literal. There are other even dispensationalists who say, no, they're literal in a sense, but they have a natural explanation. For example, a guy like Hal Lindsey would say, yeah, these are literal, but this describes really well what it might look like after a nuclear fallout. The contaminations and all these things that would happen. So it's not exactly like what you see in Egypt, right? But it's still somewhat literal in how they're understanding what's going on. This whole thing about the Euphrates drying up, these kings from the east coming, this battle, who are these people? What is all this? There's been all kinds of speculations about, even among futurists, well, who are these kings of the east that are going to come? And at different time periods, it's been a focus on different nations. I guess it depends on who the superpowers are, right? But people have suggested Japan and, of course, China and Russia, and maybe even there's some smaller countries, coming together to come and war at Armageddon, which is on a mount overlooking a valley, right? The Valley of Jezreel, I think is what it's called. Is that right? Jezreel? Yeah. And which is a famous place for ancient battles. This has been a place where many battles have taken place because it's kind of geographically, it's kind of a choke point where you have to travel through that area to get to anywhere. And so it's been a famous place where many battles have taken place. And of course, the futurist sees this as very literal, that at the end of the Great Tribulation, there's going to be this great battle that's going to happen. We'll see later how it ends. But there's going to be this great literal battle. It's sort of like Satan's last hurrah, right? It's, against God. So just a couple of takeaways. What do you take away from this kind of thing? I really think about this as I'm preparing because I want it to be more than just interesting or us trying to figure this out. It needs to be edifying. It needs to be encouraging to our souls and informing our faith. And I think this is important. I think what we just read here, the theme of God's escalating judgment on evil and unbelieving humanity, is a main theme. No matter how you take it in the book of Revelation, whether this judgment's something that's already happened or maybe partially happening, some of it's still in the future, the message is still the same. Judgment's coming, and it's going to escalate, and it's going to be final, and it's going to be awful against those who oppose God. And it is absolutely just from our holy God to judge in this way. So these images of judgment, whether, there's visions and they're symbolic and they're just to convey the ideas, whatever how you take it, that at the end of the day, it's still, you should be, it ought to be sobering to think about the judgment that God has enacted. Think of Sodom and Gomorrah. He's already done plenty of acts of judgment. But there's going to be more until it's all done, right? That's what the bowls of wrath represent, at least, that God's judgment will one day finally and completely be poured out and be final. I think a second thing is the theme of suffering Christians, whether past, present, or future, is a predominant theme in Revelation. Have you noticed that? The martyrs under the altar crying out, fleeing into the wilderness, persecution of the saints, whoever they are, wherever they are, whenever they are, it's still the idea that we should expect in this world, until God brings it to an end, there's going to be persecution. There's an enemy. There's a dragon. Okay? And there's an enemy, and he persecutes God's children. That's always been true. We live in a little temporal bubble in the United States of America in the 21st century. And what a blessing. But we have to realize what a little exceptional bubble it is related to the history of the church and even much of the church's existence even right now in places in the world. That this idea of persecution is true. But what we also learning in Revelation is that God's providence allows for this, permits it to go on for his own purposes, for his own glory. But even the persecuted church is always being assured of ultimate vindication and elevation. And we even saw in the chapters we looked at tonight this encouragement to endure. Right? Whether John was writing that in code to Christians in the first century, or whether that was written for people, tribulation saints in the future, or for us. Still the same, right? Life's going to be hard. There's going to be persecutions. God's going to allow it. One of the hardest things in Revelation is, why is he allowing this to go on? And what's the whole deal of, chaining Satan up and then letting him loose? And there's a lot of hard questions, right? But our faith has to remain strong in God to say he's allowing these things for a purpose. He will. Right. That's why I say in the end, even through the persecutions, even in a hard providence that God would allow such things, his people are vindicated. His people are elevated with him. And evil is ultimately defeated. We always have to remember that. Yeah. All right. Well, let's pray. We'll continue going on. I really did try to do too much tonight. My apologies. All right. Father, thank you for your word. And Lord, as we've concluded here tonight, help us to focus really on what we're supposed to take away from it, how you encourage us in it, how you teach us truth about yourself, even with so much that's such a mystery, so much we don't understand and probably won't. But Lord, give us humility, but give us encouragement, Lord, that you are God to be trusted with all of these things. And even in our lives right now, where we see injustice, where we see pain, where we might have struggle, Lord, we know you're still good. We know that you're in control. We know that you're moving things forward. And Lord, we know the end of the story. And Lord, that is your justice. Your wrath will prevail. Evil's defeated. And your children will be with you. So Lord, we praise you for that. We give you the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.